The kettle's whistle tore through the silence of the cramped kitchen like a scream from another world. To Elisa, only 8 years old, that sound didn't mean tea or warmth or comfort. It meant danger. It meant punishment. She stood barefoot on the cracked tiles, her small body trembling, her fingers twisting the hem of her worn-out shirt. Sweat ran down her temples, though the evening air outside was cool. Her wide, brown eyes darted from the glowing blue flame beneath the kettle to her mother's rigid figure looming over it. Letitia's back was stiff, her shoulders sharp under the thin fabric of her blouse. Her hand gripped the handle of the kettle, and though she had not yet poured, the intention was clear in every movement. Her voice was calm in the way storms sometimes are before they break. "You never learn," she said, not even glancing at the child behind her. "You never listen." Elisa's throat burned with the words she wanted to say, but fear choked her. At last she forced them out, her voice breaking. "Mom, please. I'll fix it. I promise. I didn't mean to lose the button. Please." The button. Just a small piece of plastic, fallen from Letitia's blouse earlier that day. Elisa had tried to sew it back, clumsy fingers stabbing through the fabric, thread knotted like a spider's web gone wrong. But the button rolled away, under the cupboard beyond reach. And that tiny mistake, to Letitia, was enough. The kettle shrieked louder, its belly swollen with boiling water. Letitia lifted it, testing the weight in her hand, steam curling from the spout. "You always promise," she muttered. "Promises don't fix anything." Elisa backed up until the cupboards pressed cold against her legs. Her heart hammered, each beat a countdown. She thought of school, of the kind librarian who tied ribbons in her hair, of the bright corner that smelled of crayons, and wondered if she would ever see that gentle world again. Tears blurred her vision as she raised her arms, instinctively trying to shield herself. The words tore from her in a scream that cracked like glass. "Please, Mom, don't burn me." The kettle tilted, just slightly, enough for the steam to hiss toward her face. Pain seared her cheek, sharp and immediate. She sobbed, twisting her head away, her whole body convulsing with terror. And then, the front door slammed open. The noise was violent, unexpected, shaking the air of the suffocating kitchen. Heavy footsteps stormed across the worn wooden floor, and suddenly a tall figure filled the doorway. His suit was creased and dusty, his tie loose as though he had been running. His eyes, dark, blazing, locked onto the scene in an instant. The trembling child pressed against the cupboard, the woman with the kettle raised like a weapon. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" His voice thundered, shaking the walls. Letitia froze, her hand tightening on the handle. For a moment, the only sound was the angry whistle of the kettle and Elisa's sobs. Then, slowly, her head turned toward him. "You don't belong here," she hissed. "This is my house. My child." The man stepped forward, his presence filling the room with raw authority. "Your house." His lip curled in disgust. He jabbed a finger toward Elisa, still trembling in the corner. "Look at her. Is this what you call a child? Or a victim?" Letitia's eyes flickered, just for a second, but she did not lower the kettle. "Discipline," she spat. "Abuse," he snapped, his tone cutting like steel. "Put it down. Now." For the first time, Letitia's hand wavered. The kettle clanged against the counter, water sloshing inside, steam curling into the stale air. The man's eyes softened as he turned toward Elisa, crouching slightly to meet her gaze. "Are you hurt?" His voice, now low and steady, was a stark contrast to the fury he had unleashed on her mother. Elisa's lips trembled. She shook her head quickly, though her cheeks still burned from the steam. I'm okay," she whispered, though her voice betrayed her. The man nodded, as if her words carried the weight of a promise he intended to protect. He stood again, towering over Letitia. "It ends here. Tonight." Letitia's laugh was bitter, hollow. "And what will you do, Eduardo? Call the police? Go ahead. No one listens. No one cares." Eduardo. The name struck something deep in Elisa's chest, though she did not fully understand why. She looked at him again, at the mixture of fury and tenderness in his eyes, and felt a strange pull of recognition, like a puzzle piece sliding into place. Eduardo leaned closer to Letitia, his voice low but lethal. They'll care when they see the papers. The guardianship you ignored. The custody you tried to bury. She's mine too. Letitia's face paled, her defiance cracking like thin glass. For the first time, she stepped back. Elisa, still clutching her shirt, blinked in confusion. Mine too. The words echoed inside her. Who was this man? Why did her heart, still racing, suddenly feel the tiniest spark of hope? Eduardo turned back to her, his voice gentle once more. Do you have a bag, Elisa? Something with your things? Her breath caught. She nodded, whispering, In my room. Go get it, he said softly. You won't be alone anymore. And for the first time in years, Elisa believed it. The night didn't end with the slam of the door. It stretched, long and thin, like a thread pulled from a sweater, threatening to unravel everything. Elisa sat on the edge of the front steps with her backpack on her knees, feeling the wood press ridges into her skin. From inside the house came the muffled sounds of adult voices. Letitia's sharp, hushed, Eduardo's steady, unyielding. The kettle had finally gone silent. The air felt cooler out here, easier to breathe, but the quiet had its own weight. Across the street, a window flicked to life. A neighbor's silhouette paused behind a curtain, then withdrew. This, too, was a language Elisa already understood. People saw, then decided they had seen nothing. The world could go blind in an instant if that was more convenient. She rested her chin on the zipper of the backpack and tried not to think about the sting on her cheek. It wasn't the worst pain she had known, just the most recent. Pain came in categories. There was the kind you could point to, with a bruise to prove it. And there was the kind that lived underneath the skin, under the ribs, that didn't satisfy anyone who asked, Where does it hurt? The porch light hummed. A moth threw itself at the bulb again and again, as if convinced that the brightness contained a door it could pass through if it just insisted enough. Elisa had once been the kind of girl who insisted. Before the house had learned to hold its breath, there had been mornings when she sang to herself while tying her shoes. Songs she invented with nonsense words because they sounded like laughter. Before that kitchen became a courtroom, there had been afternoons when Letitia still smiled sometimes, when smiles were not rationed like favors that must be earned. The smiles stopped after a long winter of bills and arguments and a man who came and went like weather. He had the heavy boots of a promise and the thin hands of a lie. Some nights he softened Letitia. Other nights he sharpened her. On those nights his voice didn't have to be loud to be frightening. It just had to carry the authority of hunger and tiredness and resentment that found a child easier to control than the rest of life. He left in spring, and the quiet he left behind was not relief. It was a gap where anger had room to grow. Letitia began to measure the world in mistakes. A sock unmatched, a crumb on the table, a homework paper with an eraser smudge. Elisa did what children do when love becomes a test. She studied harder. She learned the temperature of her mother's breathing, the slope of her shoulders, the way the front door sounded when it meant danger versus when it meant only noise. She learned to make herself small, to speak less, to apologize in advance, to scrub the floor in circles that mirrored the clock. At school, the librarian wrapped a pink ribbon in Elisa's hair and asked what kinds of stories she liked. Elisa always answered, the ones where someone is lost and then gets found. She didn't explain why. The librarian smiled anyway, and sometimes slipped a second book into the checkout stack by mistake. Elisa learned to tuck kindness into the pockets of her memory like secret crumbs. The day of the button started the way bad days often start. Nothing dramatic, just a collection of small failures that learned each other's names. The bus was late, Elisa's shoelace snapped. The teacher returned a math quiz with a circle around the problem she thought she had finally understood. At lunch, two older girls leaned near her table and said nothing mean, just laughed in a way that made Elisa feel as if her presence were a joke that cost nothing to tell. After school, clouds thickened over the rooftops and the wind carried a smell like wet pennies. She ran home because running felt like proof that she could change the shape of time. She arrived to find Letitia sorting a stack of mail into piles. Things that needed answers, things that would be ignored, things that pretended to be important. A blouse lay across the back of a chair. Button, Letitia said, not looking at her. Sew it. Elisa fetched the tin from the drawer. the one with needles, thread, and a few mismatched buttons shaped like stars and lemons from old shirts no one remembered. She threaded the needle with careful fingers, tongue caught between her teeth, and bent to her work. The thread knotted once, twice. She started over. The needle pricked her thumb. She didn't make a sound. Then the button slipped from her grasp and rolled on its side, a bright coin making a lazy escape. It vanished under the cupboard, a space her hand couldn't reach no matter how she flattened it, no matter how many times she said please to the darkness. She used a spoon to fish for it. The spoon clinked, clinked, clinked. The button never answered. When the kettle went on, Elisa knew the category of pain this day was becoming. On the porch, she pressed the cool zipper teeth into her lower lip until they left tiny marks. Through the door, Eduardo's voice came closer, steadying her without meaning to. He wasn't shouting now. He was doing something else. Holding a line, maybe, or drawing one where no one had drawn one for her before. The first time she'd seen him, minutes ago, he had seemed like a character pulled from a different book. Not because of the suit, though it looked like it belonged in rooms with soft chairs and iced water. Not because of the anger, which could have been frightening if it hadn't been so carefully pointed away from her. It was the way he'd said her name, as if it were an address he was determined to find, even if the house had been moved without telling anyone. Headlights washed across the street and slid over the steps. A car slowed, then continued. Somewhere a dog barked once and decided it had said enough. The moth kept throwing itself at the light, then falling back. Elisa thought about the question he had asked. Do you have a bag? She had her backpack, yes. Inside it, a library book with a girl on the cover walking through a forest with a scarf around her neck. The girl looked sure of herself, even though the trees were very large and the path not very clear. Elisa liked the way the scarf caught the wind, as if even the air wanted her to keep going. The door opened. Eduardo stepped out first, then turned to hold it as if he expected the door to argue with him. Letitia remained on the other side of the threshold, arms crossed, eyes narrowed to slits that could cut. We'll be outside, Eduardo said evenly. You and I will talk again when we're not pretending that the sound of a kettle is a lullaby. Letitia's mouth flicked, half sneer, half something else that never made it to the surface. Take her then, she said, as if the words cost her nothing. But her fingers tightened on her elbows until the knuckles stood up white. Elisa stood. The step creaked, announcing a decision even if she hadn't decided it yet. Eduardo didn't push. He stood to the side and made space. He had the posture of someone who knew that some choices have to be carried across a line by the person making them. They walked to the edge of the yard where the fence leaned tiredly into the sidewalk. The streetlights had blinked on, tiny moons with bad timing. The evening smelled like cut grass and the metal taste of the storm that might come or might not. Eduardo crouched again so his words wouldn't fall down to reach her. They would arrive at her height, already gentle. I'm sorry you were scared, he said. That shouldn't be part of anyone's day, least of all yours. Elisa didn't know what to say. She knew thank yous for things like borrowed pencils or a shared cookie. She didn't know the language for thank yous that tried to cover a whole kitchen. He glanced at her cheek. Does it sting? A little, she admitted. He nodded as if she'd told him a secret he would keep. There are people on their way. They'll ask questions. I'll be here when they do. And after. He paused. I know this is complicated. But complicated doesn't mean impossible. She stared at the shape of his shoes on the pavement. You said, the papers. The word felt big in her mouth. Are you? Do you know me? His eyes softened in a way that made the moths in her stomach thump against her ribs. I do, he said. Not as well as I want to yet. But I know you enough to know you deserve safety. And more than safety. More. It came out before she could stop it. Joy, he said simply. Books that are due because you kept them too long, and laughter that makes you forget to finish your sandwich, and someone who notices when your shoelace breaks and doesn't turn it into a lesson about the meaning of life. Her breath hitched. How do you know about the shoelace? He smiled. Small, brief, the kind adults make when they don't want to scare a moment away. Lucky guess. She almost smiled back. Almost. The porch light hummed on. The moth insisted. The world, meanwhile, showed no visible sign that anything had changed, which is often how change begins. From the corner of the street came the low growl of an engine. A squad car turned slow, its headlights sweeping. Elisa's stomach tightened, then loosened again when she felt Eduardo's presence like a windbreak. She wasn't sure if she wanted sirens or quiet. Sirens meant noise and neighbors and paperwork. Quiet meant the kitchen might reclaim its throne as the largest room in the world. The car parked. 2 officers stepped out. Not big, not small, simply ordinary in a way that was almost reassuring. Eduardo raised a hand, not waving, just marking himself as the person who would start this conversation. He didn't step in front of Elisa. He stood beside her. Evening, one officer said, voice careful, practiced. His eyes flicked to Elisa, lingered there, then returned to Eduardo. We got a call. Yes, Eduardo said. Thank you for coming. Questions began in low tones, inside first, then outside, then back inside again. Names were written, times recorded, descriptions gathered like leaves to be sorted later. Letitia's words were neat and mean. Eduardo's were quiet and stubborn. Elisa was asked what happened. She told the truth in small pieces, the way you test the temperature of a bath with one toe before you trust the water. Every time she hesitated, Eduardo did nothing but wait. That, too, helped. By the time the porch light clicked off on its timer, the night had arranged itself into a new shape. Temporary, maybe. Fragile, certainly. But different. And different is the first step toward better, even if the road between them is long. Inside her backpack, the library book pressed against her notebooks. The girl on the cover stood at the edge of a forest. The scarf fluttered. The path was still not clear. But now, at least, someone stood at the edge with Elisa. Not pointing, not pulling, just standing, saying with his presence what he had already said with his voice. You won't be alone anymore. The night after the police left felt like walking on glass. Elisa lay on the edge of her small bed, eyes wide open, afraid to close them. The house seemed to breathe with her, wooden beams creaking, pipes sighing, the refrigerator humming a low tune. She clutched her backpack to her chest, as if the library book inside could guard her. Down the hall, voices still rose and fell. Eduardo hadn't left. She could hear the rhythm of his calm sentences, steady as a metronome. Letitia's responses snapped sharp, like dry twigs breaking. The officers had warned, written, promised follow-up. But they had also driven away, their taillights swallowed by the street. And once the red glow vanished, the air in the house thickened again. Elisa squeezed her eyes shut and whispered into the dark. Please don't let her be angry tomorrow. Please don't let it be worse. She didn't believe prayers traveled far in this house, but sometimes whispering them out loud made them less heavy to carry alone. She woke before dawn, the room gray with the first timid light. Eduardo was in the kitchen, his deep voice softened by exhaustion. He looked out of place among chipped mugs and peeling linoleum, as though he'd stepped through the wrong door in life but refused to leave. He had taken off his jacket, draped it over the back of a chair, and was scribbling notes on a yellow pad. He glanced up when Elisa appeared, clutching the doorway. Couldn't sleep? He asked. She shook her head. Me neither. His smile was small but real. Coffee doesn't help much when the world is noisy inside your head. Elisa tilted her face, curious. Adults usually hid their thoughts behind walls of go back to bed or don't worry about it. Eduardo offered pieces of his without being asked. It startled her. He poured milk into a glass and pushed it toward her. Breakfast will come later. For now, just this. You'll need strength. Her small fingers wrapped around the glass. She sipped, the coolness soothing her throat. Silence stretched comfortably, not like the sharp silences she was used to. This one had space in it, space where she could breathe. Finally, she asked the question she had been holding since last night. You said, I was yours too. Her voice trembled, but not from fear. From something closer to hope. What did you mean? Eduardo leaned back, eyes shadowed. He inhaled slowly, as though choosing the right words mattered. It means, he said, that I'm your father. The word hit her like a wave. Father. A word she'd avoided at school when other kids spoke of theirs. A word that floated above birthdays she'd never celebrated, empty chairs at assemblies, and questions she had long stopped asking because the answers hurt more than the silence. She stared at him, heart thudding. Why weren't you here? The weight of 8 years condensed into that question. Eduardo's gaze lowered. Because Letitia didn't want me here. She made choices. She signed nothing, told lies I didn't know how to fight in time. By the time I understood, too much damage had already been done. But I didn't stop looking. I didn't stop waiting. His jaw tightened. And now I won't stop fighting. Elisa's lips parted. She wanted to believe him, but belief was dangerous. Hope could burn hotter than boiling water. Still, the way his eyes softened when they rested on her, it wasn't a look she knew from anyone else. From the doorway, Letitia's voice sliced through the fragile moment. Don't fill her head with stories. Eduardo turned. His tone cooled instantly. These aren't stories. They're truths she has been denied. Truth. Letitia laughed. Bitter and sharp. Where were you when bills piled up? When she cried in the night? Truth doesn't matter when you're not there. I'm here now, Eduardo said, his words deliberate, as if each were a stone laid on a path. Their eyes locked, battle lines drawn. Elisa shrank into her chair, the glass trembling in her hand. She wanted to disappear, but Eduardo's presence anchored her. He wasn't moving away. Not this time. Letitia finally looked at Elisa, her gaze like ice. Finish your milk. You'll be late for school. Elisa lowered her head and drank, though the liquid turned sour on her tongue. She felt like the rope in a game she hadn't agreed to play. At school that day, she sat at her desk, staring at the chalkboard while the teacher explained multiplication. Numbers blurred. Words blurred. The only thing sharp in her mind was Eduardo's sentence. I'm your father. At recess, the librarian found her in the reading corner. You're quiet today, she said gently. Elisa hugged a book tighter. I think, maybe someone came back for me. The librarian tilted her head, not prying. Sometimes the world surprises us, she said softly. Sometimes it gives us what we've been missing. Elisa swallowed hard. Could that be true? That night, back at the house, Elisa lay awake again. She listened as Letitia's voice and Eduardo's collided in the kitchen, arguments muffled but fierce. She didn't catch every word, but one sentence rose above the rest, Eduardo's voice firm and immovable. She's not staying here alone anymore. Elisa pressed her face into her pillow, her chest tightening with something she couldn't name. Fear, yes, but also a fragile thread of belief. The kind of belief that whispered maybe, just maybe, she wasn't invisible after all. Morning arrived gray and indifferent, a sky the color of old dishwater hanging over the house. Elisa kept her backpack close as if it were a life jacket. Eduardo had slept in a chair by the window, shoes off, jacket folded neatly on the armrest like a flag of intention. I'm not leaving. When he woke, he stretched quietly and offered Elisa a soft good morning, as if the word could build a small shelter over the day. Letitia moved through the kitchen like a storm pretending to be weather. Cupboards opened too hard. Drawers shut with an extra inch of anger at the end. She didn't look at Eduardo except to make it clear she wasn't afraid of him, which, paradoxically, proved that she was. Eat, she told Elisa, setting a plate on the table without actually setting it. More like dropping it with rules attached. Toast, too brown. Jam, spread thinly, as if sweetness were rationed. Eduardo poured juice and slid it toward the girl. We'll have visitors at 10, he said calmly, as though announcing a delivery. A social worker and a guardian ad litem. They'll speak with Elisa. And with you. Letitia's mouth twitched. You don't summon people into my house. I invite them to protect someone I love, he said. There was no heat in it, and that made the words heavier. Elisa ate with small, polite bites, the way you do when your body insists on survival even as your stomach has no appetite for conflict. Her cheek still held a faint pink mark where yesterday's steam had kissed it. Every so often, Eduardo's gaze drifted there and then away again, like a promise he was pacing beside. Time crawled until 10. At 9:57, Letitia began to hum a tune Elisa didn't recognize. It wasn't a melody. It was a warning. She moved to the stove, not to make tea, not to boil water, just to stand there, hand on the counter, reclaiming territory by leaning on it. At exactly 10, a knock sounded. Firm, professional. Eduardo opened the door to a woman in a dark blazer with a folder and kind eyes, and a second person, mid-40s, composed, who introduced himself with the careful cadence of someone used to asking hard questions gently. "I'm Camila," the woman said. "Family Services." She smiled at Elisa like people smile at frightened cats. Present, patient, not reaching too fast. "And this is Marcus, the guardian ad litem appointed for initial assessment." "Thank you for coming," Eduardo said. Letitia remained by the stove. "What's to assess?" she said to the room. "She's fine." Camila's gaze moved without accusation, collecting details the way rain collects on a window. The cooled kettle, the rigid posture, the child's backpack clutched tight enough to leave marks on small fingers. "We'll ask a few questions," she said. "We'll listen. That's all." Marcus crouched near the table, not in Elisa's space but close enough to be an option. "Do you like books?" he asked, as if that were a perfectly normal opening for a legal conversation. Elisa blinked. "Yes," she said, surprised by the warmth. "A lot." "Good," he said. "Me too." He didn't ask more. He let the first answer sit there and matter. Camila spoke softly with Eduardo in the corner. Pages whispering. Words like temporary placement and safe environment came and went. Letitia's jaw worked. Jealousy, fear, pride. Feelings elbowed each other behind her face, none willing to admit it had lost control. When Marcus asked Elisa if she would talk with him in the living room, Eduardo nodded once. "I'll be here," he said. He didn't follow. He didn't hover. He made himself a constant object in the next room. Present, reachable, not smothering the little bravery she was gathering. In the living room, sun fell through blinds in thin stripes. The sofa sagged, the springs tired of carrying weight not meant for them. Marcus sat on the edge of a chair so his feet touched the floor, hands loose, notebook closed. "Sometimes," he said, "people think they need to speak like in court, perfect and complete. We don't need that. We need your words. Even if they're small. Even if they arrive out of order." Elisa inhaled. Her ribs lifted like a gate. She told him about the button. The spoon under the cupboard. The way the kettle sounded. She did not dramatize. She didn't need to. Reality had already done that. Every time her voice faltered, Marcus waited and let silence be a bridge instead of a cliff. In the kitchen, Camila asked Letitia a measured question about discipline. Letitia answered with precision that would have impressed a mathematician if a child's dignity weren't the cost of the answer. Eduardo stood near the window, looking outward as if he could will a safer horizon closer. It almost held, this fragile imitation of procedure and calm, until Camila mentioned a temporary safety plan that might involve Elisa staying with Eduardo while paperwork moved. The word staying split the morning in half. Letitia's hand flashed out, grabbing the kettle, empty now, but its shape was enough, spinning toward the doorway where Elisa's voice still drifted in and out with Marcus's. "She isn't going anywhere," she snapped, and in her voice was the feral panic of a person who feels control sliding off her palms. "Letitia," Camila said, stepping sideways, not forward. De-escalation made visible. "Put it down. We're only talking." But the gesture, the symbol, had already scraped something raw in the room. Eduardo moved without raising his voice or his hands. He placed himself between the doorway and the kettle, not touching Letitia, not confronting the object, simply occupying the path like a wall that had always been there and was tired of pretending it wasn't. "Enough," he said. The word had the weight of yesterday and the weight of years. "We will not reenact the terror that brought us here." Letitia shook, kettle shaking with her, emptiness sloshing like a memory. "You left," she grated. "All of this, you left me to carry it." Eduardo didn't flinch. "I was pushed out," he said. "The letters you hid. The calls you blocked. The address you changed without filing. I have copies now. Every date. Every attempt. I brought proof because truth has a better chance when it arrives with stamps and signatures. He pointed, not at her, but at the folder on the table. But evidence isn't why I'm here. She is. Silence lanced the room. Letitia's breath came sharp. For a moment, the mask fell and a different woman stood there. Tired, lonely, chewed by her own resentments. The kettle lowered by inches, the stubbornness in her arm at war with a grief too old to cry. Marcus's voice floated from the living room, quiet. Elisa, would it help if you held your book? The simplest rescue line, tossed with care. Camila took the kettle gently from Letitia's fingers, not snatching, not humiliating, just removing a symbol the room no longer consented to hold. She set it on the counter with ordinary respect as if to say, "This is a tool for tea, not fear." "I don't want to be the villain," Letitia whispered, and the sentence sounded as if she hadn't meant to let it out. "I don't want to be the woman people whisper about." Eduardo's face softened, but he didn't step closer. Compassion at a safe distance. "Then stop playing the part," he said. "Walk with us instead of against us. Sign what you refused to sign. Let her live where the sound of a kettle means mourning, not punishment." For a heartbeat, surrender hovered. Then pride returned, its old, familiar armor. "Do what you want," Letitia muttered, but her chin lifted. "Take her. See if it makes you a hero in rooms I'll never be invited to." Camila exhaled quietly, the way divers do when they break the surface. "Let's sit," she said. "All of us. We'll outline the plan. No more posturing. No more kitchen warfare." They sat, awkward circle, mismatched chairs, the table a referee that had seen too many arguments and not enough meals. Camila spoke in steps, the kind that feel small until you realize they draw a map. Immediate placement with Eduardo pending formal custody hearing. Supervised visits for Letitia. Counseling referral. School notification handled discreetly. A follow-up in 72 hours. Each line had clarity. Each line was a hinge swinging the door toward open. "Agreed," Eduardo said, each consonant a stake in the ground. Letitia signed with a hand that tried not to shake and failed. The pen left a slight skid at the end of her name. She stared at the letters as if they'd betrayed her, then pushed the paper away. "Thank you," Camila said, and meant it, not for compliance, but for the chance at safety hidden inside the ink. Marcus returned with Elisa, who hugged her backpack like a friend. He didn't announce a verdict. He simply nodded to Camila, the nod that means the child's voice has been heard and will matter in rooms without her. Eduardo crouched to Elisa's level. "We'll go now," he said. "We'll get your things later with Camila, when it's calm. For today, you need air that doesn't remember last night." Elisa looked from Eduardo to Letitia. 1,000 memories flickered in the span of a breath. Hurt and hunger and small, stolen kindnesses that did not absolve the harm but existed anyway. She didn't know how to hold all that complexity at 8 years old. No one does. So she did the bravest simple thing available. She nodded. At the doorway, Letitia's voice followed, stripped of armor for one bare second. "Elisa." The girl paused, turned. Letitia swallowed. "Brush your hair," she said, but the words broke in the middle, and what came out instead, quiet, almost lost, was, "Take your ribbon." Elisa blinked. The pink ribbon from the librarian lay on a hook by the door, where hands rarely reached. Eduardo took it and placed it in the girl's palm as if it were a passport. Outside, the air felt different, not because the neighborhood had changed, but because the house no longer owned every breath. Clouds thinned. The street adjusted to the presence of a new story moving along it. Eduardo opened the car door and waited for Elisa to climb in first. Camila handed over a card with phone numbers on both sides and the sentence "call any time" written in pen. As the car pulled away, Elisa looked back once. Letitia stood in the doorway, smaller than the anger that had once made her look big. The kitchen window reflected the pale sky. The kettle, retired from its post, sat quiet on the counter. Elisa pressed her forehead to the cool glass of the window. The road ahead did not promise perfection. It promised a beginning. And in the space where fear had lived forever, a new sound began to make a home. The hum of tires on pavement, steady and patient, a lullaby that said, "Keep going." They turned the corner. The house disappeared. The day did not. It opened. The first morning in Eduardo's apartment surprised Elisa by being quiet. Not the fragile quiet of a house holding its breath, but the honest kind, windows open to a breeze, a hallway where footsteps sounded normal instead of loaded, a kitchen where the kettle's soft murmur meant exactly what it was supposed to mean. She lay awake a minute longer, listening to the city in the distance. A bus sighing, a bicycle bell, a neighbor watering plants. Ordinary sounds. Harmless sounds. The kind you didn't have to translate. From the doorway, Eduardo knocked once on the frame and leaned in. "Breakfast?" he asked. "I make legendary scrambled eggs. Legend certified by exactly one person, me." Elisa smiled before she could stop it. "Okay," she said, voice small but lighter than it had been in a long time. She padded to the kitchen, socks sliding a little on the smooth floor. The apartment was modest. 2 bedrooms, sunlight that made brave squares on the rug, a bookshelf with spines in every color. A framed photo of a beach leaned on a shelf, the glass slightly crooked as if it had been set down in a hurry and never corrected. Above the counter, sticky notes had begun to bloom. Numbers from Camila, dates of appointments, a reminder in Eduardo's slanted handwriting, return library book, ask about ribbon. That last note made something warm loosen in her chest. He whisked eggs in a bowl, added milk, then paused. "Salt," he said, reaching for a tiny jar. "Very important. Second only to." He opened another jar, sniffed, and laughed at himself. "Okay, that is cinnamon, not pepper. Good thing I checked." Elisa watched him work, the way he moved around the kitchen like a person making music. The kettle began its gentle whisper. He glanced at it, no tension, no calculation, and poured hot water over a tea bag as if he were doing something ordinary instead of rewriting a whole chapter of her life. When he set the plate in front of her, eggs soft and shiny, toast not burnt, strawberries fanned like a small red sun, she blinked. No one had ever arranged food for her to look nice. It felt respectful. "Try," he said. "If you hate it, I'll cry silently in the pantry where no one can see me." She took a bite. Warm, creamy. She nodded. "Not legendary," she said, attempting seriousness. "But a very good." He put a hand to his heart. Wounded. Deeply. Then he smiled, relief tucked inside it. They ate without rush. Every few minutes, he asked a question that wasn't a test. How she liked to take her milk, whether mornings felt easier than nights, if she wanted the desk by the window or the one by the wall for homework. She didn't know how to answer the bigger things, but she could answer the small ones. Small answers built a bridge toward the larger ones they would cross later. After breakfast, he brought out a cardboard box. "There's something we should talk about," he said, gentle. "Papers. Some of them are boring. Some of them matter. I'll handle the heavy ones. I just want you to know what words are traveling in your name." He showed her the documents, the custody petition, the safety plan, the school transfer request in case it came to that. He pointed to signatures, dates. He didn't push the papers at her. He laid them out like landmarks on a map, then told her which ones they could skip today. "We'll go step by step," he said. "You won't have to do any of it alone." Elisa traced a date with her finger. Yesterday. It felt like a lifetime and also a minute. "Will I still see?" She didn't say the rest, but he heard it anyway. "Letitia," he finished, voice steady. "Yes, but safely. With people present who make sure visits stay kind. You never have to be alone in a room where your body remembers fear. Not again." The words landed like soft blankets. She nodded. The knot under her ribs loosened a fraction. "Okay." They spent the late morning making a room that could belong to a child and not just a guest. Eduardo opened drawers and asked where she wanted things. He didn't assume. He did not say, "Girls like pink," or "You'll love this." He said, "Do you want the blue blanket or the green? And should we put the lamp on the left side or the right?" He let her choose the pillowcase. She chose the one with tiny stars that looked like the librarian stickers. On the desk, he placed a small wooden box. "I mean for this to be a treasure box," he said, awkwardly shy, as if gifts were new to both of them. "Not for expensive things. For important things." Those are different categories. She opened it. Inside, a fresh notebook with faint lines, a pencil with a soft eraser, and the pink ribbon from the hook by Letitia's door. He had smoothed it. The crease where it had hung for months was still there, like a scar that didn't ruin the ribbon, only proved it had a history. Elisa lifted the ribbon and pressed it to her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome," he said, a little rough in the throat. Then, lightly, "Now, obviously we need to address the most urgent question of settling in. What should we name the plant in the living room? I've been calling it Plant, and it seems offended." She glanced at the droopy leaves near the window. "Maybe Sir Leaf." Eduardo gasped. Sir Leaf. Knight of the sunny window. Defeater of dust. Protector of humidity. He bowed to the plant. Elisa giggled, the sound startling her with its brightness. She didn't remember her giggle. It sounded like herself in a story she'd wanted to be in. Afternoon brought Camila for a quick check-in. She sat cross-legged on the rug instead of the couch, accepted water like a guest instead of a judge, and asked how the eggs turned out. Eduardo feigned betrayal when Elisa said, "Not legendary again," and Camila laughed in a way that folded the room into something cozy. She explained next steps. A formal hearing date, a counselor's name who specialized in kids who'd learned to survive noise. "It won't all be easy," she said gently to Elisa. "But hard things are easier when we share them. And easier still when we share them out loud." After Camila left, Eduardo suggested a walk to the library. "I have a theory," he said, grabbing his keys. "People who carry library cards are statistically 87% more likely to live interesting lives." "Is that a real statistic?" she asked, skeptical but amused. "Absolutely not," he said. "But I stand by it." They walked under trees that held the last of the afternoon light in their leaves. At the crosswalk, he took her hand, but not too tightly, and he let go when they reached the other side without making a ceremony of it. The library's glass door breathed cool air on their faces. Inside, the familiar smell of paper and calm held. The librarian looked up and blinked as if seeing a photograph come to life. "Elisa," she said, surprised joy shaping her voice. "You're here." Elisa lifted her chin. "I am." The librarian glanced at Eduardo, evaluating, approving in that silent adult way, and then back to the girl. "Your ribbon looks beautiful," she said. "We saved the new adventure shelf for today." She pointed to a display of books with covers that promised forests, oceans, cities that glowed at night. Elisa chose two. Eduardo signed the card for a third, the one with the beach like his photo. "I'll return it late," he whispered to her. "Just to live up to my bad boy image." "Don't," she said, trying not to smile. "We'll get a fine." He sighed theatrically. Foiled again. On the way home, they detoured past a small park. Children spun on a carousel that creaked cheerfully. A boy attempted the monkey bars with the seriousness of an astronaut. Eduardo didn't ask if she wanted to stop. He let the park exist on the edge of the day like a possibility she could claim tomorrow. Healing didn't like schedules. It liked invitations. That evening, the kettle sang. Soft. Ordinary. Eduardo poured hot chocolate into 2 mugs and added a ridiculous number of marshmallows to hers as if he were trying to tip the day into sweetness. They sat on the rug and read the first chapter together, trading paragraphs. When she stumbled on a word, he waited. When she got it, he nodded without clapping, because celebration didn't need to be loud to be true. Before bed, he stood awkwardly in the hallway, hand on the light switch. "I don't know your rituals yet," he said. "Do you like the door open or closed? Nightlight or no? Do you want me to check on you later or will that be annoying? We'll tune it as we go." "Door, a little open," she said. "Nightlight, maybe." "Done," he said. "And I will check once." Softly. Like a ninja. "Ninjas aren't soft," she said, and he bowed. "Then I will be a very polite ninja." In the dark, she listened again. The city's soft exhale, Sir Leaf rustling when the window breathed, the pages of the beach book settling on the shelf. Her body waited for the noise it had been trained to expect. The slam, the hiss, the voice that turned a kitchen into a courtroom. The noise didn't come. The quiet stayed. The safe kind. She turned on her side and pulled the pink ribbon from under her pillow. No shrine. No ceremony. Just a small thing that had traveled with her into a new chapter. Not as an anchor to the past, but as evidence she could carry something forward without letting it own her. Sleep arrived like tide. Gentle, insistent. She didn't fight it. In the morning, she would ask Eduardo if they could stop at the park for 10 minutes before the appointment. She would choose a desk by the window because she liked how the light caught dust and made it look like stars. She would begin to learn that the world could be tuned toward kindness, not just away from harm. And when she forgot, as people do, there would be notes on the fridge and a plant named Sirleaf and a man who burned toast sometimes but never water. For now there was this, a house that didn't flinch. A future that didn't hiss. A girl whose voice, and used to its own echo, began to believe it could fill a room without apology. And somewhere in the city, another kettle sang, ordinary and unafraid. If Elisa's journey moved you, help us keep telling stories that protect the invisible. Like this video, subscribe to Cries, and share it with someone who needs to hear that safety and joy are possible.